Hello and welcome to Dev Academy podcast, your gateway to the insights and wisdom of prominent experts and engineers from around the globe. I'm your host, Bartosz from Dev Academy, and it's my mission to help you glean insightful knowledge from the vast experiences of our distinguished guests. Each week we will delve into timeless topics in software development, focusing on crucial areas like security, quality, and design.
It's like when you buy a tool, you are safe. That's a very common. Like, let's buy, SaaS tool, and then run it against your code and all good. That's one of the myths because every tool is different. Every tool has different engine and different false positive ratio. In the best world, I would say my La La Land fantasy world, sci-fi, in 500 years, you will have something that I call scanning trees. You will have multiple tools for the same purpose with a different engine and being able to compare them. For example, running Sneak, having Veracode or check marks or whatever together, or having Sneak for infrastructure as code and having checkoff for cross-check of this information. And checkoff is infrastructure as code scanning. So there is no single tool that will solve your problems.
Before we continue with our insightful conversation, I'd like to share something that I'm really proud of. The Web Security Dev Academy Bootcamp. I created this program to help developers like you deepen their knowledge in web security. If that sounds interesting, you can join our exclusive waiting list to be notified about the next launch and start receiving tailor-made security tips. This is not a usual online course, but group-based cohort training with my direct support. To join the waiting list, visit websecurity-academy.com. It's websecurity-academy.com, or check the links in the description. If Bootcamp isn't quite what you're looking for at the moment, there's another way to support us. Please consider rating this podcast on your preferred platform or leaving a comment on YouTube. Your feedback is incredibly appreciated and helps others discover our content. Also, if today's conversation sparks any ideas or if you find it useful, don't hesitate to share this podcast with friends or colleagues in the tech community. Your endorsement helps us reach and inspire more developers. Thanks for your support, and now back to our conversation. Welcome to another episode of Dev Academy podcast. Today we have Marek Šottl on the show. And Marek, we are going to talk about AWS Security, but before we jump into, can you tell us briefly why and how did you get into AWS Security Cloud especially?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's more like 8 years ago. It's just by accident. I just get to a team called Specialized Engineering. I was doing some cloud, but it was not AWS. I was working in T-Mobile at that time, and we did some custom cloud, if I would call it like that. And then I got the opportunity to work on a public cloud like AWS, and I was like, that's something that I need to try. And then I jumped to, I would say, DevSecOps or DevOps field with the flavor of security. And then I started to work on AWS, and from that time, I didn't see anything better, so I stayed in the industry, and I think that was something, that was the right decision to do. So it was a natural flow.
Okay, so guys, we have 8 years of hardcore experience in AWS Security in the house, so fasten your seatbelts because it's going to be extremely interesting. So I have one question that I like to ask people before we start the nitty-gritty of technical stuff. If you could time travel, would you go to the past or to the future? And if so, how far from today would you go?
I didn't expect it, that one. That's I'm a huge fan of...
That's exactly the point.
I'm huge, so I will go to the future. And for me, I think that 500 years or something.
Wow.
That will be in the future. That will be interesting to see.
Why?
Because I'm not happy with the current state of technology, and it's for me, it's I would like to see the stuff that I see in the sci-fi today. And I don't see it, obviously, because it's a sci-fi. But it will be great to see how the future looks like, and if some of the Jules Verne's ideas or the current sci-fi ideas will come to fruition. That's what will be very interesting for me. And also, seeing how the healthcare developed and transportation, if this will develop the energy, the consumption and the ability to process the energy. All of these things will be great to see. And, obviously how cloud will look like, but I think that in 500 years it will be absolutely different.
Yes, definitely. But it sounds a bit scary, at least for me, to imagine the future if we move suddenly to the future of 500 years from now. But let's leave this thought to some imaginary scenarios and go back to AWS security. I believe about 2 days ago you did AWS Security Bootcamp. How did it
Yeah.
go?
Yeah, it's up to, not up to me to decide it. It's usually about the people who attended that. I do believe that it was great. Actually, I enjoyed that. Funny thing is that I usually learn more than the people there because they learn a lot, but by the right questions from them, I usually discover that okay, I never thought about this idea, or I never even thought that I never questioned how the things work. But if you see people who are like being exposed to AWS or AWS security at all, even DevSecOps or AppSec, they started to ask the right questions, like why it is like that. It's like children, children asking why, and you answer why, and they say, and why this, and why that, and why, and they're asking continuing why, which is very cool for me to see. Okay, I don't know the answer, but I will figure it out. I will figure out that for you. So that's what I really enjoy on the trainings, and I'm doing sometimes boot camps that are online, sometimes boot camps that are like on site, and I like more the on site because there's the chemistry with the people. You can have group tasks, so I do believe that it was great. Uh, I even know about myself that I talk a lot. I'm very fast sometimes, and I can be pushy on the boot camps. So I do believe that people will think about that for next 6 months, and they will still process the information that they get.
It's really interesting that you said that you learn a lot, potentially more than the people who are participating as a students, because they ask you a question that you don't know the answer to, and then you start digging in, which I believe is very much through doing my own trainings. And for example, Web Security Dev Academy, when I was preparing the content for, many years, many months. That would be many years of experience, but many months of preparation, because actually maybe that was like a slip of a tongue, but there was a bit of a truth in that, because you try to put many years of your experience into one day bootcamp, or maybe if it's online, it's divided into some modules. But the truth is that I spent many months of preparation, and during this time it was most intense when I also was learning when preparing the materials, which you are also reflecting on, I guess, that
when I'm also doing too the application security trainings too, and it's very hard because the field is moving so fast. So you prepare the materials for I don't know, cross-site scripting, and there'll be new type of the cross-site scripting, so you need to include that in your training. Or there'll be new type of the attack you need to include in the training. So for you, and I know what you're talking about, is like continuous learning, because you need to update your content. And I'm sure that when you're building like at least a 1 day training, it can take to 6 months of preparation. Same as with AWS or any type of security. And funny thing on that is it never ends, because when you build the content, it can be already late. It's already old and obsolete. So you need to update it again, and you need to learn again, because to explain things, you need to understand things first, like really well. So you need to learn. You need to like ingest the data.
Actually, I really enjoy what you just said, and I would just try to hang on it for a little. I do believe what you mentioned, but only partially, because on the flip side, I think that the fundamentals of how web operates, how the general things of how the web and internet is constructed remain the same for many years. It's not that it changes overnight, that we are going to throw away HTTPS and now we are going to use something that comes from the 500 years of the future, because the things that are fundamental, the very premise of how cross-site scripting works remains the same. You have to understand that if you put the input that is not sanitized, or potentially is mixed with the code that was supposed to be data, and once you get it, it's enough to feel what this fundamental thing is. Do you agree?
I agree on that 100%. I just maybe use that a bad example. I just want to say that you need to update the things. For example, I was doing a training on how the OWASP evolves, from 2017 to 2022. And then I was like, hey, next year there will be something new, or the order will be different. So that's what I meant. Maybe that's a better example. The standards are evolving for sure. How cross-site scripting works is the same problem, input sanitization, and that's a long-running problem from 90s. I would say from 90s is the same issue.
That's my point. Maybe the techniques of ingesting the code might be slightly changing over time, but the very nature of the problem will remain the same for a very long time.
100%, 120%.
Okay,
I agree with that.
Yes, so I am happy that we have found the conclusion because I was a little bit itchy when you said every half a year you need to update the knowledge about cross-site scripting, right?
No, I didn't mean like cross-site scripting, but that was just an example. But you need to update a lot because there are new types of the attacks. The new tooling is there, for example, Mm-hmm. You for example, even for I'm talking about Bootcamp sometimes. And extensions for Bootcamp. There are new extensions all the time. There's a community behind stuff. There's new open source. There are new open source toolings. And basically this evolves super fast. So people who are training, they need to keep track with it. Yeah,
sure.
Cross-site scripting was bad example.
Yes, that's we are 120% sure that we agree on this matter of fact.
Yes.
Cool. So coming back to AWS, if with your very vast experience in AWS, can you just put on the table the most critical best practices for securing cloud-native applications in AWS environments? Because I do believe there is a difference between application security from the let's say code that is just the independent of where it is deployed, but when you decide on AWS, you are moving a little bit lower in the stack, and then you need to think kind of like infrastructure security, because you have this top level application, and then on some lower level, then there is this is the infrastructure, and from the different perspectives, there is also a vast majority of different attacks and vectors and risks that we are going to talk right now. So from the application, moving down to infrastructure security in AWS, how do you see this right now?
That's a funny thing, because I was starting like everyone else on-prem. Everyone started on-prem, but when you move to cloud, you realize that infrastructure and serverless and how applications are being built is tightly coupled together. The infrastructure difference between infrastructure and application is a little bit disappearing in cloud, because everything is abstract, defined through APIs. Use, for example, Terraform. And with Terraform, you can deploy application itself and the infrastructure. And you pack these things together. So the attack vectors for applications are still valid in cloud. Cloud provider will not fix it for you. It's still the same. AppSec is still the same. But there are new types of the attacks and new things that you need to check, that you are responsible. And I know that everyone talks about it, and I will mention that. It's obvious for people who are in cloud, but everyone forgets about that. There is a shared responsibility model. So you as a company or the developer, you are responsible for the part of the cloud, which means the platform itself, the application, how you set up everything. That's your responsibility. If you create remote code execution in your code, you are responsible for that. The AWS or GCP or Azure will not solve it for you. You need to build infrastructure around it. You need to have firewalls around it. But what is the most critical thing, and that's the first thing that you need to learn when you go to cloud, is identity and access management. And I'm not talking about the users and everything. It's about the IAM API, how the permissions and roles work in cloud environment. Because in cloud environment, even serverless code can have execution permissions. And these permissions, will tell you what's the lateral movement possibility, what are the lateral movement possibilities for you, or what's the access, for example, for Lambda, which is serverless service in AWS, where you just write the code and the underlying service is managed by AWS for you. And it has its own permissions, and these permissions are dictated by AWS IAM. So I would say this is the most critical thing to manage, and companies are failing in that because it's a complicated thing. You need to basically define for every API that you have in cloud. You need to define the airbag, basically the permissions that you have for the specific service. And it doesn't mean only the application itself, but infrastructure. VMs or EC2 instances in AWS, they have also their own role. So when you have, attacker in the instance with the remote code execution, the role itself is attached to that VM, and it says where you can go with the VM, which other services you can use. Obviously, you have the networking setup, which can be also dictated by code, and that's where the difference between, because everything is code, in cloud everything is code. Infrastructure can be code, application can be code, permissions can be codified. So the layer between, or the difference between infra and app is smaller and smaller. And according what people need to check first, I would say basics, because like the complete basics, people are usually forgetting that. Everyone goes full-blown Kubernetes, full-blown, serverless, but they forget to check, for example, AWS Landing Zone Accelerator, how to build the base account setup for security, how to build Azure adoption framework. For any type of providers, for any cloud providers, there are like best practices. There are white papers for everything. And every time when I talk with the companies, or when I work with the companies, or even when I'm working now in my current job, I see that the people forget to read, understand the details and the basics. And I would say this is the first step that everyone needs to do.
And actually, let me try to get into some of the points that you mentioned. First of all, I'm really glad that you mentioned that the basics are fundamental, because throughout those conversations I make with people that are experts or practitioners in security, the theme of understanding the basics is fundamental. I mean, nobody ever denied that fact that you need to go to some nitty-gritty, because 80% rule here, 80-20, is significant, that you will fix 80% of your problems by 20% of the fundamentals, because then you get my point, right? So
yes.
So you need to find those 20% that usually are very, very easy, very, very simple, because they are the fundamentals, they are the first steps, and you are 80% done with your security setup. And this is something that you just mentioned, and I just rephrase it because I recall those echoing in my head when I talk with people that and also this little bit comes back to the first question or first topic that we had, that I was trying to make the point that the fundamentals will be the same for a very long time. The frameworks will change, the tools will change, the procedures and fundamentals and models and the rules of on some level are going to stay, and this is the low-hanging fruit when you are getting into the application security.
100%.
I will go back to the question of the topic of cross-site scripting. You will find some sophisticated string queries or different manipulation techniques that will be coming, every couple of days into the wild, but fundamental premise that the sanitization, validation, and filtering, understanding how it works, is just going to stay, right?
It's the same.
Exactly. So you may see that, this is a new regex, regular expression that breaks this filter, or this is a new type of the data string that I can put here and it will break the filter. But on the flip side, the filtering, validation, and sanitization is still the same, right?
100%. That's true. That's true.
Okay, so let me go a little bit further with what you mentioned, that when you talked about the very first thing that people need to understand when it comes to AWS securities, identity and access management setup properly, that everything in the cloud has its role, has its policies and permissions. So exactly, you need to have in place a proper setup. Every person that is in the IAM, every instance of API, everything that can be called, everything that can be accessed needs to be hardened properly using those concepts like roles, policies, what do we have, groups, and so on. And there are different types of that. But once you are done with that, for example, I recall you mentioned that when an attacker is in the instance, they will try to extrapolate potential loopholes inside. But as soon as you recalled yourself that I need to apply the rule of minimizing the risk and zero trust is one of the fancy terms, or the principle of the least privilege, only giving the access to the things that are critical and nothing more. Because if you, for example, go on the other side of the spectrum and say, okay, you can do anything you want, because just how it is, you need to do this, so I will just give you access to everything, because it will fulfill its role. But as soon as someone adversaries gets into the cloud, then they will try to execute different purposes, actions than the one that you as an engineer or an application developer thought about, right?
Mm-hmm. And funny thing on top of that is you don't know what you don't know, and there are tools for everything. You know, it's already there. So the IAM has a way how you can define the permissions. But AWS, I will just talk about AWS now. They have IAM Access Analyzer, which will tell you which permissions from your roles are you actually using, which is a funny thing because it will help you to apply what you just say, the least privilege principle, because you will apply only the permissions that you are actually using and you need. And there's a tooling for that. When I talk with my customers or even with my friends, they are like, there is such a thing like access analyzer. I never heard about that. And it goes to the topic, you don't know what you don't know. It's like you don't have time. People don't have time to research all the possibilities, all the options that you have in cloud. So that goes to the basics, studying what is possible, studying and understanding which services are available for you. There is even IAM Access Simulator, for example. IAM Simulator you can put there the role and you can check the permissions if it will work for you or not. So it's like there are many tools from AWS and they are even free, you know. You don't need to pay for them. So you can check it. Or there is an open source tool called Cloud-Splaining. Cloud-Splaining, you can run it against your account and it can tell you which IAM roles are suspected to privilege escalation, or which roles can lead to data exfiltration because there is a public API that allows you to get the data from that DynamoDB or for NoSQL database, from RDS, which is a relational database, or from S3 buckets, which is very common case. You know, public S3 buckets are the very common case for cloud data exfiltration or exposure.
I cannot prevent myself from saying that every couple of weeks when I scroll the social media, I can see that there are companies and accounts that report on such things, and every couple of weeks there is, this company leaked the data of the user base. This company leaked the data of their patients in the hospital. This company has leaked all the personal details of this group, and so on and so on. And then you were referring to this situation when then there is some public API or some other loophole that can be extrapolated for the data because someone gave too much permissions.
Exactly. That's it. Or you need to even try very hard to mess it up, because when you are, for example, setting up the S3 bucket, which is object storage, by default it's not public. I remember times when by default it was public. They changed it like on the opposite side. Now it is like private. You actually need to go and actively set it up to public. So that means that people are setting themselves for failure if they do it, because they say, hey, I need to have it public because of some reasons. But there are many ways how you can secure that. You know, that's a funny thing. It's not even the default setup. So that you need to actively try to destroy your security.
And I will one more time come back to the fundamentals. So I love it. I really love it, because you say, okay, you need to especially set the S3 bucket to the public access. Yeah. But this is this thing that I will put to the bucket. These are the things that changes from month to month. But if you have the idea of least privilege principle or zero trust, let it be then S3 bucket, let it be another API, let it be something else, let it be, I don't know, FTP old school or HTTP. As long as you have those fundamental principles in head, you are going to be the unbreakable developer resource in the company, because you will understand the fundamentals. I mean, do I really need to make it public? Well, as you mentioned, because if I make it public, these are the risks or that and that. And it doesn't matter, because as long as you remember about those principles of security and you know the fundamentals, you are probably think twice when you have this S3 bucket toggle to make it public, and then you look at another tool, another thing, another API, another thing, and then you will think twice, should I really be doing this? And then go further and analyze what can be the consequences, right?
100%. I really like to talk with you about these things because it looks that we have very similar experience. I have another example. It's, for example, billing alarms. It's very simple. There is a attack, and it's my favorite one because it's fancy. It's called denial of wallet. When you have denial of service, there is denial of wallet. That means you pay for everything that you run in cloud. You pay for that. And there is a way how to inject your resources, push you to pay more because you pay for API calls, you pay for data transfers. And I can make your bill pretty big by pushing your services to spend more. So create more resources, spin new clusters, new nodes, or creating semi-DOS, if I will call it like that, just to kill more and more resources on your side. And if you don't have, and then it goes to the basic, if you don't have set up the billing alarms or budgets that you want to limit your spend in cloud, which is the first thing that you should do, you can have very serious problems with the denial of wallet attacks, because somebody can make your bill in thousand or even millions of dollars if you don't have restrictions and if you don't have the billing alarm saying, hey man, you are just spending, $500,000. Maybe it's like too much for you now, So and that's also back to the principles of basic settings. When you set up the account, you have alerting system in place. You have your budget limitations, because maybe you are not Rockefeller or whatever. You don't own like 20 Bentleys. You are not like super rich, and you go to cloud because you want to save money, so you want to be cost effective. But some hackers can say, hey, what will happen if I will make him spin up 20 instances, 1,000 instances? If I will push him to transfer 5 petabytes of data, because you can actually do that by some attacks. Or you can, if you have serverless code, you pay for execution time. And there are attacks, again, because of what you already mentioned, wrong input validation can lead to many different attacks. And you can, for example, create a loop in the code by injecting the code, and the code will run longer in Lambda. And in the serverless code, you can push the application to run the full limit for 15 minutes, 15 minutes, and you pay for full 15 minutes. And you are charged by millisecond. And if you do that 1,000 times per, hour, so you are spending more and more resources, and the company pays more and more because of the basic thing. Somebody did wrong input validation.
Yes, the reason I'm saying this is because I'm coming back to 2020, which was the year. As I mentioned, I spent many months of thinking through Web Security Dev Academy program, and I was constantly asking my questions. If I put to the agenda the topics or concepts that are going to change next month or potentially next year, or I'm back in the fundamentals, I'm going to. The exercise example is great because I was trying to distill the fundamentals. Okay, once you go through the exercises, once you go through the explanations, you will remember the underlying principle. And I wanted to explain people in the way that I really don't want to use examples or use some explanations that are going to prone to expiry during the next couple of months because the new thing comes out. Because distilling it to the very nature of the problem, and I say this is just one example, but this is not the all that possible cases. But this is one example. But I don't want you to look on this example and say that this is the way it works. I want you to understand that this is one example, but this is the fundamental thing that actually can lead to this, and this may be that or that. I don't know what comes up tomorrow or the next year. This is going to be your responsibility as you use your new brand framework or something like that. I'm showing you the fundamentals. That's why it took me very long time to trying to distill the things that are are not going to change every couple of months, because the funny thing is, because I will finish my story here, because before I started in 2020 this security thing, couple of years back I was running bootcamps for Angular framework, and the moment when they said that every couple of months they will make a breaking change, I was like, come on, I spent so many time creating these materials, and they are coming now that every couple of months everything that I did was going to be irrelevant because they will make a breaking change. And I was like, I mean, no. Sorry, I want to focus on something that is fundamental to all software engineers. And then I decided to focus on security, testing and quality, and architecture. And then it changed everything. I didn't have to worry about every breaking change. But it's a hard work. Distilling stuff to the fundamentals is more hard that you can imagine. I do believe that you will understand that, because everybody can just look at some piece of code, but understanding the principle and being able to find the similarities between different examples and boil down to, I know what it is. This is example of that and that, but this may be varying from very many different perspectives. But as soon as you boil it down to the idea of the problem, then you will have the tooling mindset of spotting this in the different instances. Do you agree with me?
I agree with you, Ed. And also, additional hard part is, according to this particular topic, is association. When you are teaching people, you need to give them right association. When they will see it in the future, they will associate that in their head, and they'll say, "Yeah, I saw that somewhere." So it has a new name, it's a new issue, but it's just a permutation of something that was here in the past. So that's a very hard thing, which takes years to learn, to have not crazy association and be able to abstract these things in the way that people will understand that, and they will remember that for years. So
I just recalled myself that there was a mathematician that says, I don't remember if it was Einstein or some other famous, scientific figure, but someone said that the being able to spot the analogies is a skill, but being able to spot analogies between analogies is another level. Right?
That's inception. That's inception level. Like
exactly.
Analogy in analogy, and
because when you find the analogy, then you can mentally understand stuff. Okay, this is an instance of that. This is simple. But the guy said the next level is that when you spot the analogy between analogy, and then it's like a poof, you are going on the next level of abstraction and start to see through differently that, okay, this is similar to this, but on the different level, and I can see analogy between analogy. And when I was thinking and reflecting on that, this is really great, powerful mental model to think in this way, because one thing is understand, okay, this is the example of that, I get it, but on the higher level, you may see things on a different perspective, right?
Yeah, that's same as with the SQL injection or cross-site scripting. There's an analogy between them too, if you think about the types of the attacks.
Yes, because then when you look at OWASP, then you probably see the injection. They are boiling down the problem to the injection, and then you go down. Okay, I can inject code here, I can inject code here, and this is SQL, this is code, this is JS, this is HTML.
Same thing goes. I was doing research last year for Lambda injections. It's the same thing.
Okay.
If you don't have validated input in Lambdas, and you are responsible for the code reviews of serverless, it's not like someone else will review that. If you're writing Lambda in, I don't know, Boto tree or any kind of framework, any language you select, and you create an RCE vulnerability, remote code execution, you can execute the code inside of the Lambda to get the credentials of Lambda to be used at your disposal for exploitation of the account of AWS, for example. And that's again, it's a flaw in the code, which means that you allow the remote code execution through bad input validation or bad logic that you created in the application, or the Lambda itself is communicating with the underlying layer, the operating system way it runs, which is called it's a firecracker. Basically, that's again the analogy that you have. Like SQL injection, any type of injection, then you have, for example, serverless, and you create injection there, and you can extract the credentials from Lambda. That's what we are talking about. It's analogy of this is a new attack, affects new service, but the way how it is found and executed, it's already old. It's already the same like the previous ones.
Great. I love it. So coming back to our idea of securing AWS, how do you think we can focus on building DevSecOps pipelines, and what are the key components that should be included to ensure robust security throughout the development lifecycle? And I cannot prevent myself from putting a taint analysis of an automated tooling that can be part of answer to this question, because you said that injection is something that you put into the program and then it falls into the sink. And I really enjoyed this mental model again. I love mental models, to be honest. One of the ways, I will partially answer this question on some level, but I will love your perspective that you can attach into your DevSecOps pipeline some automated taint analysis tooling that will try to build abstract syntax tree and see, okay, this is how we process the input, and these are potential sinks. And based on some automated tooling like SAST, you can see that this is a potential SQL injection or cross-site scripting, because the flow of the program has been found in the abstract syntax tree from the input here and to the sink here, and then boom, you have an issue, right?
Yes. So it's not. I can talk about this topic like for hours, because that's what I'm doing on a daily basis. I will try to abstract it again, make it more simplified, and squeeze it to small like ice cube, at least for the listeners. It's you can automate almost everything if you want, and if you have time for it and right team. For the DevSecOps, there is something called DevSecOps maturity model that I really like to point on. It's OWASP DevSecOps maturity model, which shows different layers of DevSecOps. Not everything is a technical. It's also culture thing. It's also process thing, like how you release software, how you build your security champions program. All of these things go tightly together. You cannot just cut one thing and say, I will do it later, or I will not care about that. The culture around DevSecOps is super important for bridging dev, operations, and security together. And you say that already. You can have, for example, static code review automated during your CI/CD. But that's like one of the many things that you should do. You need to have software composition analysis, which is basically checking the dependencies of your software itself. And you need to check even the transitive dependencies. Many attackers today, they are waiting for the domains to be free. Like in the hacking communities, when you look at what real attackers are doing, they're buying domains to own the email addresses, to reset the email and get the access as owners to open source libraries. And then they get control over, 35,000 libraries by just like waiting for the right moments. So that's where the SCA is super important. Go on. You wanted to say something?
Yes, I wanted to say that there are at least two of my guests who were stressing this extremely hard. It was Seth and it was Randall. When we talk about Randall, when we talk with Randall about it, we were focusing a lot on that topic, and there is a possibility to point here, hey, click here on the YouTube to see this episode, and another episode with Seth when he was saying that SCA and open source vulnerabilities and software composition analysis is going to be, it's already huge, but it's going to be even more important thing.
Yeah,
because
it is.
Because you said it. Once a guy gets into the open source library, it can immediately poison hundreds of projects.
100%.
And that's why you have your software composition analysis and say, hey, we just found out that this version has RCE. You shouldn't push it to production because you are going to have serious consequences. That's why I couldn't resist to point that at least two of my prominent guests were talking and pushing this topic really, really hard, that SCA and open source vulnerabilities and what you mentioned, people hunting for the domains, resetting the access to the open source code, poisoning with the different malicious code. This is already a serious issue, but it's going to grow.
Yes, because the amount of open source libraries is growing like exponentially. It's like flying, it's like open source is like having boom, And when you look at the amount of not vulnerabilities, amount of open source libraries, and even as effective vulnerabilities, and how many people are actually maintaining this open source, it's like usually one or two guys, or ladies who are enthusiastic about specific topic. They build an open source library and they support it. And it's not a commercial software. It's not a big company having thousands of engineers. It's usually supported by very few enthusiastic people. And if they will stop to do that, you can get some serious issues with security. Or there can be someone else taking over. They will not be so aware of the security. Yes, big advantage is that you have a community behind it and they can report the issues. But the amount of the active developers on open source is usually smaller than in commercial software, which makes the money. That's and that's it. And to this topic, I'm working on that on day by day. I'm building DevSecOps pipelines for different products in our company. It's also about like secret scanning, and what I'm missing nowadays in the tooling is correlation between SCA, static analysis of the code, and dynamic testing. So for example, you will find out there is an issue in software composition analysis in some library. SAST will tell you, hey, you are using this vulnerable method from this open source library, so most probably there will be, remote code execution. And the DAST will verify that in this input, you can use this remote code execution to actually exploit it. That's what I'm currently missing on the market from the tooling perspective, to find out the correlation between these different stages of testing. The code testing, the dependency testing, and then when the application is actually deployed, verifying what are found in the SAST is actual issue. Because it has some limits, and we know why. Because the correlation requires like actually some new kind of product. I don't know how to describe it. You have, for example, vulnerability management tooling that can compare different results from the different tooling, but the correlation is the hard thing. Correlate and findings from the different stages together. And that's, sorry, go on.
So coming back to our initial problem that securing the DevSecOps pipelines, we have a software composition analysis, we have SAST, static application security testing, we have DAST, dynamic application security testing. What can be here from the culture or threat modeling perspective, from the people perspective, put on the table here?
So I already mentioned that it's a security champion program. Education of people, that's super important. We actually started with our talk with education and where to get the basics. I would say the education is super important because when you say SAST, usually people see I need to do software static application testing. But SAST can even include testing of the infrastructure as code. And people need to get educated about that. People need to get information about the tooling. They need to understand how to do infrastructure as code scanning in a static perspective and put it in the pipelines. So from the cultural perspective, I will say the education programs in the company and building a security champion program, which is basically people who love security in the company, who can support you, you give them training, you create internal communities. This is a super important topic because usually you have, and that's a very known topic, I don't want to open that again because everyone talks about it. It's like you have one security engineer per hundreds of engineers. And you as a security engineer, you cannot serve this scale. And for that, you need to have culture of security is a job zero. That's it. And everyone understand that the security is their responsibility. And on top of that, you usually need to build an internal community where people who are excited, enthusiastic in any field in security, because that can be crypto, that can be cloud, that can be, application, it can be networking, they go together, they exchange the knowledge, they learn together, and they get in a space, for example, having shared epics in the community. I really like that idea. When you have community, you have security champions program, you create a space for them for learning. You obviously need to give them money for learning, you need to give them time, but you need to give them also space to have, for example, to solve the company issues. And that's what many companies are not doing today. Like, we have an issue in crypto. For example, we are using wrong cryptographic libraries and we need to do research on which libraries are the best. But the for example, shared library through the whole company. And if you have 5 crypto experts in the company, if you will put them in the community, in the security experts, security champions, and create a work group from them, like Epic for a whole year, for example, that's an example, and they will work on that and give them the space for it, that will help a lot culturally because they will do something they like. It will benefit the company itself, and they will learn and they can share it with the others. What I'm also doing in my current job, and it's an experiment that I tried in different companies, it's always different people, it's I'm running the certification study groups, which also helps sometimes. Like we have 2 times per week, like 30 to 40 minutes, and people want to learn something new. They say, hey, I have knowledge gap in AWS networking, and I need to learn how to build the secure networks. So we have like 30 minutes training together. I prepare some materials. We check the resources for that. We discuss. And I would say this is like, I call it safe space, which will allow you to not know. So I like to create space where people can come and say, I don't know that, but I want to learn it without being judged. And I think that's also a big cultural aspect of security, because security is very hard, and you need to give people to say the space to say, I don't know that, I want to learn it, I don't understand it, and they will be not blamed for not knowing that. And then you can give them the space to learn the topics that they're interested in.
Okay, so you actually answered my next question, which was elaboration on the security champion programs, and I think we already have covered this very, very well. So another perspective is that, do you think are some common myths about application security, like AppSec, that you encounter, and how do you usually, address them in different teams, projects, companies?
I will use a few examples because there are many myths that we can talk about, and it can be like separate podcast episodes that are myths in the AppSec. It's like when you buy a tool, you are safe. That's a very common. Like, let's buy, I don't know, SaaS tool, and then run it against your code, and all good. That's one of the myths, because every tool is different. Every tool has different engine and different false positive ratio. In the best world, I would say my La La Land fantasy world, sci-fi, in 500 years, you will have something that I call scanning trees. You will have multiple tools for the same purpose with a different engine and being able to compare them. For example, I don't know, running Sneak, having Veracode or checkmarks or whatever together, or having Sneak for infrastructure as code and having Checkov for cross-check of this information. And Checkov is infrastructure as code scanning. So there is no single tool that will solve your problems. And if you have the scanning tool, you need to have also some other tool, for example, for vulnerability management or aggregation of these data. So every tool is specialized, and management cannot expect that one tool or one scanner will solve everything. That's one of the common myths. I would say not between the engineers, but between the management. I don't know if you agree with me.
So we have busted the first myth that managers think that as soon as they buy a tool, the problems are solved.
And I have like second myth, which is coming now. It's a very actual topic, and it's something that I'm working on. It's SBOM. SBOM is useless until you utilize it well. Software bill of materials. Basically, the list of the dependencies, vulnerabilities, and licenses that you have in software. In my current company, we are building our own engine that will generate SBOMs in every stage of the development. And I have an ETL engine that we wrote that can query the pipelines and tell me in which stage of which software which SBOM was generated, which is pretty cool. And we have even the ability to compare them. So if somebody will inject it during the process, you can have comparison with the previous SBOM, and you will know that the new dependencies appeared. So SBOM itself, like if you just generate SBOM at the end of the process, that's basically useless, because you don't know if somebody injected or poisoned your pipeline during the process. That's the first thing. Second thing, SBOM is just a text document. It's JSON or XML. It depends on which format you are using. Then there are 2 formats called SPDX or CycloneDX. and they contain the information about the dependencies. But when you look, for example, on Maven or other packaging systems, when they generate SBOMs and or you are using them for generating SBOMs, it will just tell you the name and the version of the library. Some of these packaging systems, they are not doing hashes not proper hashes of the dependencies. So if the content will change, you will not know about that. So this is something that SBOM will not solve for people. And I recommend to check the hash, because sometimes the hash in SBOM is the hash of the name, which is funny thing. It's not hash of the content.
Can you elaborate on what exactly the problem is SBOM trying to solve, and how it can be properly leveraged in the development pipelines?
And I know that there's a legislation coming for software providers. They will need to provide SBOM with their software. That's something that's coming very soon. So if you have a software house, you will need to deliver that. The problem which is SBOM trying to resolve is a supply chain protection / analysis to report you what you consume and what you produce. And basically, which dependencies you consume and which dependencies are part of your software. And this includes the information about dependencies, versions of the dependencies, the licenses that the software that you are using are attached to it, and in the context of Cyclone DX, even the vulnerabilities. So you will provide a complete, I would say, attestation. It's not an attestation, but the idea behind it is to provide, I attestate that my software was built in this way. It contains these dependencies with these licenses in the ideal world. But SBOM is not there yet, because it has its flaws. You don't have any assurance that everything that's written there is 100% sure. There is limited ability of signing of SBOMs. You cannot have digital signature attached to it, because only way how to produce today's signing for SBOMs is have a hash and then do some hash signing. But attaching to the current format or current document a signature, I am the one who issued the SBOM, and I'm producing that. It's not there yet. So that are the current unsolved problems. And many people think, or many companies will think, hey, I will just produce SBOM and I'm okay. And that's like 100% attestation about how we build the software. And sometimes SBOM is used as a source for vulnerability scanning. For example, Dependency Track and some other tools consume SBOM as a source for dependency scanning, which can lead to misinformation because you don't have the proper data in SBOM. This can be flawed too. Imagine that somebody will poison the pipeline. You are storing the SBOM in the pipeline itself, which will be a bad idea, and somebody can change the SBOM. Then you will send it to the scanner, and you will be scanning different libraries than you actually have in the software.
But another problem is that those hashes that you mentioned are not always produced from the content, but from the name, which is pointless.
And that's true, and that's a very hard topic to solve, because how you can generate hashes of every library in the world if they are stored in some remote registries. So to cross-check that as a person, you need to trust the vendor, or you need to have ability to clone or download the artifact from the remote repository and generate the hash by yourself to check it. And imagine that you have 60,000 dependencies. I'm exaggerating, but imagine you have 60,000 dependencies and you will need to download all the libraries, create hashes, and then check if the hashes are correct.
So there are companies which are mature enough in the terms of security that maintain their own internal repositories and very much check everything that can fall into this Artifactory or different kind of, or Nexus or
Nexus
whatever
IQ,
you
Artifactory,
use.
Even AWS, they have their own code artifact, which is like trying to be competition to JFrog and Nexus IQ.
Yeah, so there are different tools, like we mentioned Nexus or Artifactory, that can be internally maintained by the company, And I remember when I first, it's a very long time ago, a few years back, when I was working for one of the banks, I was like, we really cannot use any, open source library from the wild, because there was a very strict list of dependencies that we could potentially use, and they were internally maintained. There was no access to GitHub. There was no access to any other place. There was internal repo. All the packages were strictly curated and cross-checked, and this was the only way you could actually use some external library. But we know that the bare bones of each and every project is the, building blocks. You just make sure that those building blocks fulfill the business task, but you don't reinvent the wheel. You don't reinvent all the problems that have been already solved by someone else. You just pick a library. So this is the bare bone of the each and every software project. That's why it's another reason why SCA and open source issues, as well as this, there is this term called software supply chain security, that this is fundamental right now. And I'm just mentioning that like many years ago, I first stumbled upon this, and I was thinking, like, because it may be sometimes making you angry, because you find this very shiny, great library someone developed on GitHub, and you can't use it because there is not yet in your Nexus or Artifactory, and some security teams didn't allow you to connect to external, because sorry, we can only use this and that. This is our Nexus, this is our Artifactory, this is our place of the trusted vendor packages, and goodbye.
And then imagine, I'm now working for the company. We have 19 or 18 product lines. Like every product is a company by itself. And we have thousands and thousands of dependencies. So you can manage to certain point of dependency. So imagine you will have half of a million dependencies in the company. It will be big software provider. It will be very hard for security team to review all of that. Very hard. So with the scale, it gets more complicated. And there is no simple solution. And I know that Nexus IQ, they have a firewall that can scan the binaries before they will reach the artifact storage. I think that this is the only way how you will need to react on that. Automation, like before you will upload the package, you will do your own review of the package itself in the automated way.
So coming back to the myths, do you see any DevSecOps myths? Like in general, we talk about application security, but on the lower level, on the infra and operations, like DevSecOps, do you find any interesting myth that we can debunk?
You mean like on the infrastructure of the like in AWS or in the cloud, or you mean like?
I was referring to DevSecOps, or the operations that are done on your infrastructure during the process of building, deploying, packaging, like that.
Yeah, so I will say there are a few myths around infrastructure as code scanning. That if you have infrastructure as code scanning, you have like infrastructure deployment, and you will scan it before you will deploy it. It will be secure. That's not true. It must be secure even in the design. It's like you can have secure infrastructure. I will just give you an example. You run, for example, Snyk infrastructure as code scanning against your Terraform. And it will tell you have public S3 buckets, so you remediate that. It will tell you cannot have security group with the SSH publicly accessible. So you will remediate that too. But if you have design which says, I have public API without no authentication, but the scanner will tell you are all good from the security practices. And because there is no stage or no API key attached to your API. And the infrastructure as code is still okay. It will tell you infra is good, API is good, and there is nothing missing because it scans the code that exists. It doesn't scan the code that doesn't exist. So you can have design which actually is not secure by default because you are missing some services that in cloud are providing critical security infrastructure. For example, if you scan the web application firewall, you will, if you miss web application firewall, that's a very simple example. the infrastructure as code scanning, so scanning for the infra code, will not tell you, hey, you are missing VAF, man. It will tell you, you misconfigured this, you misconfigured that, you forget about this. You will need to have different type of evaluation of what is running in the cloud and what you missed. So that's also one of the
checklists are a great way to make sure.
CIS benchmarks, there's something called well-architected framework that people usually forget that it exists, and that are the best practices and techniques and design decisions that you should go through the checklist and not forget about that.
There's this book called Checklist Manifesto, and the guy is actually going in and out how checklists in the human nature of the problems can be really helpful, because I do use checklists like on many different places. A simple best example. I'm a solopreneur, so I have to report my incomes and expenses every month. So when I started, like many years ago, every couple of months I was forgetting about some invoice, and I was calling my accountant, like, hey, I'm sorry, I know I gave you all the papers, you can close the month of invoicing, but I forget about that. And after a couple of failures like that, I don't go on that. I have a checklist of tools that I use on monthly basis. As simple as I pay now for ChatGPT Plus, and as soon as I purchase some monthly expenses, I put another entry in my checklist, and every month I go through the checklist. Okay, did I provide this tooling invoice to my accountant? And then I pick, and it's so easy to implement and so drastically improves your life because you don't have to put it in your head. So I'm all into checklists and processes and automations like that. So it feels like this checklist manifesto can be applied in many areas of your life, because you mentioned that you can use a tool that will scan things and say, you misconfigured that. But what are the places that should be that are not there, right? Yeah. It's just like you cannot scan the code which is not there. And you mentioned well-architected review from AWS and probably different frameworks that can tell you, okay, check this and that, because it's not about misconfiguration, but did you actually put this piece of code into this place? Did you do this? It's not about did you misconfigure, it's about did you implement this and that. And from my experience, as a simple example, as a checklist of all the documents that I have to put every month, it solves so many problems, because at the beginning, before that, it was obvious. Every couple of months, I was forgetting about something because it was not there. But as soon as you have a checklist, which is proactive approach, it's not what you already have, which you should have, but you didn't. You didn't put, right? So I think this is interesting. And can we put it to summarize one of the myths that you mentioned, that just scanning your infrastructure is not enough because it will just show you the things that you do have, but you might forget about other parts?
Yeah, then you will need to combine infrastructure as code scanning, then the configuration scanning in the real cloud, and compare them together. That's what you need to do. And
any other DevSecOps myths?
It's not the myth, but you just reminded me something that I found really cool, and I want to mention here too. The checklists. There's something called security scorecard, and these security scorecards these are checklists. You can run it in the CI/CD, and the scorecard will check if you have SAST, SCA, DAS, etc., and it will print out for you in your pull request the results of the scorecard, the checklist, if you didn't forget any important CI/CD job in your pipeline. I just want to mention that because I was like, this is really cool.
We can put it because this episode is going to have the show notes on the blog post on devacademy.com. It's dev-academy.com/podcast, dev-academy.com/podcast, and then we can have a show notes of all the things. It's going to be Markdown, And the beauty of the system that we have in Dev Academy is that you can contribute. It's open source. You can find later your episode, and if you find something that, hey, I would love to mention this and that, you just make a pull request. And it goes to our CI/CD pipeline. And after a couple of minutes after the Markdown edit was accepted, you will see it live on the blog.
That sounds like a homework. Sounds like a homework.
So another idea, let's get back to security tools and techniques. With this, vast plethora of security tools available in DevSecOps area, how do you recommend developers and security professionals? How do they evaluate and choose the right tools for their specific needs? Because we already covered this a little bit, that this is a problem. This is a huge problem. You just know, okay, I will take another scanner and I'm done. How do you think we should evaluate and choose properly that we actually need this kind of scanning?
So I will do a small advertisement for myself. I'm maintaining open source library called Ultimate DevSecOps Library, where is a list of the tools and the purposes for what you can use them. So I'm actively maintaining that. It's not an easy task, but the Ultimate DevSecOps Library is open source. Anyone can contribute. If you find any tool which is new and you want to say, hey, I want to share that with the world, I'm maintaining that. I'm approving the PRs, reviewing if the tool actually exists, if it is even DevSecOps tool, if the purpose is correct, if it is like, I don't know, at least 200 stars and other things. So that's one of the things what you can use. And
you can put it into the Markdown under
that's another homework. That's another homework.
Yes,
Thank you for that.
just make a pull request, and I will review it, and I will check if this exists, and then I will accept it, and this will be live on devacademy.com/podcast.
Okay, so that's something I'm maintaining, and according the evaluation itself, I'm doing evaluations on, I would say not daily basis, but monthly basis. What is the best thing is, define for yourself the evaluation criteria, what you are looking for. Forget about what is in outside world. Don't read the marketing materials. Write down the features that you expect from the tool, what you want to solve, and then pick two, three, maximum 4 tools that you will find in the area and compare them at the same time, in the same period, that you can see them in the action comparing next to each other. Don't do like evaluation, then another evaluation, then another evaluation, and discover, I'm going back to the first tool. So best thing what you can do is evaluate together, at the same time, the tooling, write yourself explicit evaluation criteria, and you can even put there a percentage, how important they are for you. And usually what I'm doing, I'm not doing anything secret, I'm sharing that with vendors. I'm saying, this is what I'm looking for, this is how it is important for me, and if you want to be really like detailed, you can say, this is the performance that I expect. You can put there some data. For example, I want to serve 300 developers. I want to have at least 5,000 API calls on the scanner per minute. And I want to be able to evaluate 500,000 lines per day. So you can put yourself, you can set up yourself these expectations.
Mm-hmm. Great. I mean, we have just exceeded our usual 1 hour of the conversation, and I will have some final questions. The field of this cybersecurity and application security is rapidly evolving, but we already mentioned that we have to distinguish. It's like a coin which has two sides: fundamentals and nitty-gritty of the news and frameworks and tools that changes rapidly. And I completely agree that, tomorrow we may have another vulnerability that just popped out and then another framework or tool. So this is one side of the coin. The other side are those fundamentals. That's at least my take. It has two dimensions. But from your perspective, if we talk about this in 2 dimensions, how do you stay up to date with the latest trends and technologies that can you share to others?
Yeah, so I would say you are doing great blog posts, so that's also one of the really good things to read. Even the Portsfigure, which is a creator of Burp Suite, they have also very good blog posts. Many vendors which are focusing heavily on, I would say, hardcore security, they have also very good blog posts. For security, they have reInvent every year. That's something that I recommend. There's a Reinforce, which is focusing on security too. So AWS YouTube channel for cloud, AWS blog posts too. You can even filter the topics, because your mind will blow up if you will ingest everything. So you need to filter the topics on AWS pages with the blog posts and select the specific topics that you are interested in, because it can be network security, it can be DevSecOps. There is also very good source material on DevSecOps University. That's the name of that. At DevSecOps University, they have a DevSecOps professional certification, and they have a DevSecOps University huge list of the links with fundamentals and then some advanced stuff. But I would say, and it's super important, if you are any practitioner in the industry, build a network on LinkedIn or any social network. And I'm learning the most from my peers. I will not lie to you. I'm not waking every day and go to read all the blog posts, because that I will be dead by reading. But I really like to pick up the things. For example, on LinkedIn, there are many great people sharing super cool things that I will never discover if they will not share it. So building the proper community and proper network around you with the same interest as you have in your field in security is so super critical. And I learn the most from other people. That's
great.
That's a full disclosure.
And the final question about the future trends, maybe not 500 years away from today, like we mentioned at the beginning, that we would like to see the future of, in 500 years from today, which is probably very exciting, but maybe a little bit scary. But based on your experience and insights, what do you think are emerging trends in the cloud security and DevOps that developers should focus on and be aware of the coming years? Not 500, but maybe 1, 2, 3, or 5 years.
I know that you know the answer already. So it will be AI. It will be AI, because everyone talks about that. Everyone invests in it. The funny thing is, it is a new and it is old trend same time. So I would say the AI usage in code reviews, that's 100% sure that will come here. Many vendors are working on that. You can even write your own. Actually, I was sharing the video in my YouTube channel, how to build your own security scanner with AWS PartyRock, which is a tool that you can use for free. You can build your own security scanner with AI. So I would say the machine learning and AI will actually bring up some interesting tooling in the future. Fun thing and fun disclosure for SIAM or any data-heavy platforms, like data analytics for security. It is here for a very long time. It's already being used. It was even used in the firewalling technologies. So I would say this is a trend that continues. Now it's just more fancy than before, and we will see more and more tools using code profiling help, security scanners, and even the advisors like chatbots with recommendation how you can improve your code in real time.
That's a great closure for this week. And I will mention two things. First of all, with Randall Dex, we already discussed this topic, and maybe you can check here this episode. But we talk about it, and it was really interesting what they found playing with AI and how useful but extremely risky can be using AI generating the code that is obviously malicious, but AI was not able to see it because of the context. And it depends on what kind of AI you're using, because everybody is talking right now about generative AI, LLMs. But this is not the only one of AI that is there. In 2015, so about 10 years ago, I did my master thesis on machine learning, and this field is for the decades here, and I was focusing on gesture recognition and different kinds of machine learning and implementing different solutions based on supervised learning. And the idea of learning, machine learning, supervised learning, unsupervised learning, and reinforcement learning, and different kinds of types there has been there for like decades, right? And we already talked with Randall about it, that LLMs are cool, but it's just one kid in the field, right?
Yeah.
There are another kinds of AIs better suited for different problems, and LLMs are cool, they are generative, but they have their own issues and they can be risky. So I agree with you that AI, again, it's not. I also want to mention something that when you scroll through LinkedIn, like throughout the last year, everybody are now AI experts that jumped on the hype train like a year ago. But this is just the surface. Of course, prompting is important and cool, but this is not the only thing to have in your head when you touch the field of AI, because prompt engineering has become super popular. You can potentially be super well paid expert, but I think it's just the surface. As long as you don't get again the fundamentals, that this is just one kind of AI. This is generative AI, these are LLMs, there is symbolic AI, there's deep learning, there are neural networks, there are I remember the first time when I touched AI was the first perceptron, which has been here for many, many years. And perceptron started the era of machine learning that actually started to become really, really useful for many different purposes. And my take on that is that AI, yes, but not just on the surface, like, okay, let's learn prompt engineering and we are AI experts and we can put on LinkedIn that, I'm an AI technology leader because I have learned how to prompt engineer ChatGPT. This is not the way to go.
Exactly.
The surface, this is way more deeper. And if you want to get into that, we can definitely would need another episode of the podcast.
100.
Great. Thank you. It was Marek and Marek Šottl. And thank you for being a guest. I can't imagine another episode without you in the next couple of months, when we will see how the Dev Academy podcast grows, and we will ask probably the audience what is another take that you would like to hear from Mark, which is definitely someone who has a lot of passion, a lot of interest and experience in security. And in this podcast, we discussed AWS security and some other surrounding trends. Thank you, Marek.
Thank you for the invite. I appreciate that. It was a great chat.